Good afternoon. Welcome to episode 60, the big 60 of Duval Rundown. My name is Gus Logue. Today I'm joined by Rick Ballou, who hosts Into the Night on 1010XM and 92.5 FM each weekday evening from 6 to 8 p.m. Rick is going to talk to me about just all of the recent Jaguars moves, because even though the Jaguars are no longer in the 2024-25 NFL season and the Super Bowl is just a few days away, the offseason is very much underway, and we've got a lot of various hirings and staff changes to go through. But first, we're going to start out, as always, with some Jaguars trivia. Tony Boselli was named on Monday. Tony Boselli was named Jaguars Executive Vice President of Football Operations. He was Jacksonville's first ever draft pick, the first Ring of Honor inductee, the first player inducted in the Hall of Fame, and the first player to have his jersey formally retired by the franchise. So Boselli's been a lot of firsts. He's technically not their first EVP, but first EVP in a while. But the trivia question for today is, what was Tony Boselli's jersey number? Rick, I figure this is an easy one for you.
I got it. Can I spill it?
Yeah, spill the beans.
Yeah, that'd be 71, and I'm really not a numbers guy. It's amazing. I love how the fans get into it, but even the almost a decade that I was a sideline reporter, if you had pulled me over and said, what was their uniform combination today, I don't know if I would have gotten it. I've never been a uniform guy or a numbers guy, but yeah. Tony Boselli, number 71. That is perhaps the biggest one that this organization has ever had. Hopefully Fred Taylor joins them later this week. I think it's still a year away from Fred, and then Jimmy Smith and Tom Coughlin. I think a few years down the road there'll be 4 representatives for the Jaguars in Canton, Ohio.
Yeah, hopefully we'll have that to look forward to this weekend. This year's Hall of Fame class, Pro Football Hall of Fame class, will be announced at the NFL Honors Ceremony, which is usually the Saturday before the Super Bowl. So I assume it's this coming Saturday. We'll be able to find out whether Freddie T made it in this year's class. But obviously, Boselli is already in the Hall of Fame. He's the first and currently only Jaguar to be in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. He's also in the College Football Hall of Fame. But I think there's a few Jags that have that honor. But the most recent honor for Tony is being named Executive Vice President on Monday. And so I think that this was news that was expected certainly around our radio station, if not just greater Jacksonville. But Rick, what was your kind of reaction to hearing it on Monday, and just reaction in general to the Jaguars having an EVP again in position?
What took so long? I mean, they've never had a guy like this in this position, a former player. Tom Coughlin obviously did it, and it felt a little bit different with Tom. It almost felt like he was the eye in the sky, and how much say did he have over Dave Caldwell and Doug Marrone? There was always that feeling that, if things really went sideways with Marrone, which I guess they did, that Coughlin would come down. And then, of course, he had problems with staying within the rules, and the NFLPA came out with their letter and ended up costing Tom Coughlin his job. But I think this organization has always needed more voices. And Tony Boselli is a guy that is so well respected throughout the league. I mean, I've known Tony since I did the Tony Boselli show back on the ball in 96, 97, and 98. We're virtually the same age. So I knew him in his younger 20s when I got here to Jacksonville at the same time. And, I've learned to really become, very much in sync with the way that he is thinking when it comes to this organization, traveling with him for 10 years on the Jaguars radio network. And 3 of those years, his son played at Florida State. And Tony and I would go on the road to the Florida State Seminole Bar and watch his son play and talk about the Jaguars. And what I think is so important here is that today, as we continue to move forward, it feels like the players and the coaches, they turn the page and they're over the loss almost immediately, where Jaguar fans grieve. It ruins their entire week. And Tony Boselli is one of those guys that he is going to hurt with Jaguar fans. He's going to feel the elation. He's going to feel the disappointment. But now he's got the respect in the Miller Electric Center, where I think he can go to Trent Baalke like a year ago and say, Trent, the season ended 18 days ago. You have not spoken to the media. 18 days. Get in there and talk. Tony Boselli is the guy that I think can do that. That shouldn't be the PR's responsibility. That shouldn't have been Doug Peterson's responsibility. That is the executive vice president who can talk to the incoming GM, who can talk to Liam Cohen, who can report to Shad Khan, who can go back and forth and do things and say things that connect these dots, but it comes from a powerful voice who has the respect from both sides. And it's hard to find guys like that. The biggest question I have, Gus, is, we've seen this evolution of today's players for one reason or another. They don't seem to respect their founding fathers. Maybe the best example of that was C.J. Stroud's awful comments a year ago on Fred Taylor. We're seeing players get coaches fired today. Aaron Rodgers did it to Robert Saleh. Micah Parsons threw Mike McCarthy under the bus. I hope Tony Boselli can rub off on some of these players. I don't know if he can. I don't know if anyone can anymore, because we've just kind of seen the way that kids are today, how they don't respect the elder the way that my generation did. So I think that's going to be the biggest challenge for Boselli. But outside of that, I think everything else is going to be really good.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, is that it's not just important how he communicates with all the top brass, whether it's the head coach and the general manager or team owner Shad Khan, but also in terms of the players. He's going to be a very important voice at all levels of the organization, and arguably his voice as it relates to the players is going to be the most important part. I do think it's interesting that he's the executive vice president of football operations, but it seems to be mostly name only title, where I'm not sure how much true responsibility he's going to have. Obviously, we can all agree that he's going to be a very important voice, but I don't know how much true decision or hiring and firing power and all that kind of stuff he's going to have, especially when you relate it to the former EVP Tom Coughlin, where it's he was kind of the football czar and everything went through Tom Coughlin. And now I think you're on the right path, where it's not everything goes through Tony Boselli now. It's just that he is an additional important voice. Jonathan Jones of CBS Sports tweeted yesterday, the Jaguars named Tony Boselli as EVP of football operations. I'm told the Jaguars general manager position will be considered the primary football executive with a league office. So this is a bona fide GM job. So in other words, again, whoever the general manager is going to be isn't going to really report directly to Tony Boselli. It's going to be more of a kind of group effort. And so, again, like you said at the top, I think that just adding a voice to the room is very important, but especially when someone like Tony Boselli, who, even if he doesn't necessarily have front office experience, he certainly has Jaguars experience and certainly cares about the team. And so I don't think that that's a bad thing. And so to move it on towards the general managers, we don't have to spend a ton of time on this, because, it's hard to tell who's going to be a head coach, and it's even harder to tell who's going to be a good general manager. But before we get on to some of Liam Cohen's staff hirings, Rick, do you have any thoughts on the list of potential Jaguars, or the list of Jaguars general manager candidates that they're interviewing? I'll go over the list right now. There's one that was just added earlier today. Oh no, I just lost my list. There's
James
someone.
Gladstone, who was added today, the Rams director of scouting. Yeah.
Thank you. Gladstone was added, and then the rest of the list is Chargers assistant GM Chad Alexander, Giants assistant general manager Brandon Brown, Bengals senior personnel executive Trey Brown, Bears assistant general manager Ian Cunningham, and Bucks assistant general manager Mike Greenberg.
Yeah, and the two I've heard most about are Ian Cunningham, who has a great resume. He's learned under some wonderful winning programs, and including he had been in Philadelphia before he went off to Chicago. Mike Greenberg as well has gotten a lot of play as the Buccaneers assistant general manager. What I think is really intriguing about this, first of all, we all have our opinions, and it's based on, I think, a lot of knowledge when it comes to a coach. When you get to a general manager, man, this is a weird area. It really is. And the first thing that sticks out here, you notice that these are no former general managers. These are all going to be brand new GMs. So this is an organization now that's going to have a brand new EVP, as we just talked about with Boselli, a brand new general manager, brand new head coach, brand new offensive coordinator, brand new defensive coordinator. The only returners are special teams coordinator and Heath Farwell. So it feels like to me, Gus, that, and I know that Jaguar fans don't necessarily want to hear this, but it feels like this is a patient hiring cycle where you're not recycling guys who have had these positions before. You're bringing in younger individuals, and it feels like Shad Khan has said, listen, the leash is kind of long here. This isn't a you better win this year and you're gone. This is a 2 to 3 year at a minimum type of opportunity. What I do like with a lot of these candidates is that they do have winning backgrounds. And to me, that's incredibly important. I think bringing in someone who has learned from organizations that are consistently playoff teams, that have learned how to draft well and then re-sign your own players. Free agency can really backfire. Now, it worked around here 4 years ago, when the Christian Kirk and you gave the 1 year deal to Ingram, and you made some of those other hires that ended up being pretty good, both offensively and defensively. And then you look at what happened last year, where it just ended up being a complete disaster. So, the blue blood of a program is being able to draft well. And then the pleasant problem becomes, do you have enough money to be able to afford to re-sign all of your players, where free agency, fixes holes, and it should be immediate, 1 year or 2 years. So who has the best background? Who has contributed the most in the draft? Again, that responsibility to me is something that I don't think is concise league-wide. I mean, does the general manager make the first round, second round, third round pick once you get into Saturday? Is that really just the notes that have been compiled by your scouts, and you trust your scouts when you get to, sixth round picks, seventh round picks? I mean, ego comes into play here, but to me, that's always been so fascinating about this. You have so many guys doing different jobs who obviously put together their recommendation, but when it comes time to drafting, do you take that with 100% certainty, or do you still have the gut feeling as the general manager that no, even though everything is paving the way to draft this guy, I'm going to go in a different direction? I love that stuff. I wish I could be a fly on the wall to be able to witness how those conversations actually take place. But I think it's a fresh list. And I think the other side of first timers coming in is that they know this is their one shot. Trent Baalke got fired. He was one of only 2 general managers in the NFL who had a second opportunity. This is unlike coaches, this is a one and done gig. And that's why, whoever they hire, you would imagine is going to do everything in their power to try to right this ship. So I think this was a good list. I think it's going to be Ian Cunningham. I think that's going to be the hire. Again, there's 5 other candidates. Ethan Waugh as an interim is going to interview as well. So that actually makes 7.
True.
But I'm going to go with Ian Cunningham.
Okay. Yeah, I think you had it right where, even though I said it is very hard to figure out, especially from our perspective and people outside of NFL buildings perspective, who's going to be a successful general manager, even if you have a good idea, with the draft being a crapshoot and so much luck being involved, it's just really hard to tell. But I think that you're right where, the best place to start to look is people who worked in successful organizations. And so I think Ian Cunningham, even if the Bears haven't been a perennial playoff team, they have built up a pretty impressive roster recently, and I think Cunningham is a big part of that. He also shares an agent with Liam Cohen, and I think is just genuine friends with Cohen, even past the agent relationship, and so that's definitely one to look for. The other name that I think strikes me the most is Chargers assistant general manager Chad Alexander, because he followed Joe Hortitz over there from Baltimore, and he had 2 decades of experience with the Ravens and under Ozzie Newsome. And so just because of that makes me interested in Chad Alexander. But I do think that the list as a whole is pretty fantastic. And I really like that. I mean, you said that it's very rare for general managers to get a second shot, but you also said that they seem to be very patient with this process, where it feels like There was a lot of general manager kind of interview requests that came in the news for the Jags, I think 2 nights ago. And so we kind of figured it was just going to be like a list of 4 candidates, but then they keep adding to it. And it was kind of a similar process with defensive coordinator. And so I like how patient they're being, because at first I was like you, and I wanted a lot of experience, especially because Liam Cohen is a first-time head coach and Tony Boselli is a first-time EVP. I wanted, at the very minimum, like a defensive coordinator with a lot of NFL experience. Like Patrick Graham was my guy, and I was bummed that the Jaguars missed out on him. But now I honestly really like the process, because something that Liam Cohen said during his introduction last Monday, I couldn't find it in the transcript, so it must have been on his appearance on the Frangie show. But he said that one of the things that he learned during the interview process, or a good tip that he had, was to just be himself, which is really just a good tip kind of in any industry. But I think it also helped him to realize that it's whatever the vision for the Jaguars is going to be his vision specifically. And I think that they're doing a good job of not being okay, we're a young team and we've got a great quarterback, so let's go try to get Chip Kelly and let's go get experience in the form of Patrick Graham. I think that based on the way that all of the interviews have gone for offense coordinator, defensive coordinator, all the different staff positions, but also general manager, I think that they're just doing their due diligence to try to find someone that's going to have the same vision as Liam Cohen and the same goal as Tony Boselli and Liam Cohen, which is to bring championships to Duval. And so, I know you were saying earlier about how it'd be great to be a fly on the wall, and how sometimes in the draft room it comes down to people kind of banging their fist on the table and saying, this is my guy. But I think that the Jaguars that's going to happen, but the Jaguars are trying as hard as they can to make sure that that doesn't happen, and that they find someone that's, again, just has the same exact vision as Liam Cohen, so that they're step in step throughout the whole team building process. And so, to kind of wrap it up, I definitely thought that they should lean towards NFL experience when building out their front office and their staff. But now I think that they're taking the right approach by being patient and making sure that they're getting what they want to get.
Yeah, I agree with you with Graham. I mean, my say would have been Ben Johnson, head coach, Patrick Graham, defensive coordinator. They didn't go in that direction, and I'm obviously going to support, and for the sake of Jaguar fans, I hope they do get it right. You mentioned Chip Kelly. I think this is very important, and I've spoken with quite a few people about it, including our friend Dave Campo. I do think somewhere in the organization, you need to bring in a previous head coach. And, reportedly over the weekend, Ron Rivera was interviewed. Monty Kiffin, he wasn't a head coach, but Monty Kiffin was a guy they brought in a few years ago. There's been others as well. Mike McCoy was brought in by Doug Peterson. When Gus Bradley was a first-time head coach, he brought in Doug Marrone. I just think there's so many things that Liam Cohen is going to be thrown into that he's not aware of yet. And I can't even imagine what that must be like for a head coach, his responsibility literally with everything. And even if you have a guy that's behind the scenes, let's say that Ron Rivera is hired as a defensive analyst and is a guy who's there all the time and is, in the box during games. Just a guy that you can meet with during the week, that, the simplest of things that seem so obvious that may be complicated. When does a team leave for London? You got a West Coast game. They got West Coast games this year. Do we leave on Friday afternoon? Do we leave on Saturday afternoon? I mean, there are so many different things that are going to pop up for Liam Cohen that I'm sure he has no idea about, that any new coach has no idea about. I think it'd be great to have an ex-NFL head coach on that staff for reasons like that.
Yeah, I totally hear you. I again commend the Jaguars for trying to build out an entire staff and front office that shares the same vision. But you ultimately definitely need experience just to have a sounding board for the exact reasons that you brought up. It's less about Liam Cohen being oh man, this defensive front that this defense is running is really stumping me, and I need an experienced guy to help figure out to just problem solve on the X's and O's spreadsheet or chalkboard. It's less about that and more about what you're saying and just simple logistics. And like, do I break up the buses by offense and defense, or do I go younger guys and older guys? It's just little stuff like that. That's like, for a guy that hasn't been there before, hasn't been a head coach at any level, let alone in the NFL, it's important to have guys like that. And so, again, as you mentioned, Ron Rivera, I think Sean Shipley was the one who reported he's being interviewed for some kind of role with the Jaguars. Mia mentioned on the show last week on Duval Rundown that Don, I think his name is Don Brown, whoever Liam Cohen's old coach at UMass was, maybe he could be like a kind of senior advisor and hired here in Jacksonville. And so even though, I mean, the offensive coordinator hasn't been hired yet, we're expecting to hear that news pretty much today, honestly. And if not today, then probably tomorrow. But it seems like the offensive coordinator and then definitely the rest of the coaching staff is pretty young so far when you look at it. And so I agree that whether it's Ron Rivera or Liam Cohen's old coach or someone else, it's just good to have a sounding board available for a lot of different reasons.
Interesting is Don Brown, much like Mark Whipple, they went to UMass twice. They were there, they left, and they came back. And Don Brown was fired midway through this year. And, Mark Whipple's son was actually hired today.
Right.
Spencer as the, new quarterbacks coach. So there is and that was something that Liam Cohen mentioned. He talked about Don Brown. He talked about Mark Whipple when he was introduced during his initial press conference. So again, not the biggest names ever, but guys that he learned from and is taking that with him. So, that's a good point. And there's a lot of good football coaches that are out there. There's no doubt about it. It's just about identifying them and bringing them in. And hopefully you can turn that culture around where they start winning some games, because I think we'd all agree that's the biggest thing that needs to be fixed. They got to just turn the culture completely around.
Totally. And that's why I'm so happy about them taking their time and making sure that they have everyone on board with the same vision and how they want to build out the entire organization, rather than being like, oh, let's just go get Pat Graham and kind of hand them keys to defense. Because that probably would work, and especially in the short term. But I think that the way they're doing it is very good for their long-term prospects. Before we get out of here, I just want to run over who is on the staff so far that we know.
Sure.
Obviously, head coach is Liam Cohen. The Jaguars retained special teams coordinator Heath Farwell and tight ends coach Richard Angulo. As you said, they hired Spencer Whipple as the quarterbacks coach today. Whipple spent the past 6 years in Arizona under Jonathan Gannon and Cliff Kingsbury. If you watched like Jaguars social media posts from Liam's opening presser, you saw Liam and Christian Kirk talk about Spencer Whipple and how that's each of their guys. And so cool that Whipple is coming, and potentially a sign that Christian Kirk is going to stay around. Then the Jaguars have hired Anthony Campanile as defensive coordinator, Matt Edwards as defensive line coach, Tim Lukabu as linebackers coach, and Anthony Perkins as secondary coach. Before we get out of here, Rick, just any thoughts on any of the hires so far, or is there any names that you're looking forward to potentially joining the coaching staff who have not joined yet?
Yes. For me, the biggest hire of all is the offensive line coach. It has been consistently, in my opinion, soft in the interior offensive line. And, you can make the case that 4 of those 5 spots are set for 2025. Obviously, right guard, they either got to really spend here in free agency or they have to address that very early in the NFL draft. I love the Kevin Carberry situation. He's 41. You can't bring him in as an offensive line coach. You'd only be able to get him here as an offensive coordinator. The only conflict that I have is this guy's never done it before. We know he's not calling plays. That's Liam Cohen. But there's still so much responsibility with being an offensive coordinator. Can they kind of camouflage that where they've just brought in a quarterbacks coach? Can they bring in a passing game coordinator? Can they bring in a rushing game coordinator? Can they hire an assistant head coach? Another major offensive voice there. Give Kevin Carberry the offensive coordinator spot and the offensive line coach. Still, he has responsibilities with everything that a coordinator would as far as, day-to-day game plan, scheme, looking at the opposing defense. There's all those responsibilities. But in my opinion, I've been a stickler on this for a very long period of time, Gus, that if they don't fix this offensive line, Jaguar fans are never going to really be able to find out if Trevor Lawrence can get to that elite level. You look what Cohen did last year. They ran for 82 yards in 2023 in Tampa. He took them to nearly 150 yards a game with a fourth-round rookie. And I know they had 3 backs who actually touched the ball. But you hear Liam Cohen talk, and you can tell that running the football is going to be a huge part of this offense. They have to hire the best offensive line coach that they can. And I think it's Carberry out of Tampa. But the only way you're going to get him is by putting the offensive coordinator title above his head.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see if they can get him, or if they end up hiring that assistant general manager in Tampa Bay, or if they end up not being able to get any type of Buccaneer to follow Liam Cohen. But if not, I think Liam Cohen has already kind of dove into his past with the Rams and the coaching staff there. And so maybe he'll continue to do that. I think Shieldhouse from the Rams is definitely a name to look out for if it doesn't end up being Carberry. But yeah, I totally agree where the offense coordinator, but more so the offensive line coach is very, very important. Cohen said as much last week, saying that it starts up front. And so it'll be very interesting to see how the rest of the staff continues to be built out. We will be back here to continue talking about all the various staff changes and Jaguars news on Thursday as Mia returns as a guest at 9:04 a.m. So until then, thanks to everyone for tuning in. Rick, appreciate your time, man. Thanks for joining.
Always a lot of fun, Gus. Thank you.
All righty. Take care, everyone. Have a good day.